Hi there and welcome to the Planet Zoo Every Animal Franchise Zoo. Today I'm continuing the journey to add every single animal to this zoo, and for this episode that includes a number of taiga, temperate and tropical animals. Before we get into that, there was a comment last week that asked if I would address what I'm doing with the work zones. Now, as you can imagine, a zoo of this size would be impossible to manage without any work zones, so I do have work zones set up. How well I'm doing managing work zones, I guess that is very much more subjective on that matter. There's 13 work zones set up so far, and the way I set them up, it really depends on how close they are to some of the habitats. Some may only have 2 or 3 habitats in a work zone, others can have 10 plus. It depends on how close they are. This view gives you a general layout of all the buildings, and you can tell from this where the clusters of work zones are with the buildings close together. In the early weeks working on this zoo, I was setting these up individually. Now I just copy and paste what I consider to be a good general work zone setup that includes all the buildings you'll need after you've started the initial game. Generally, I'm always going to need electricity and water treatment, so got those at the end there. Then I've always got a quarantine and a trade centre. Then we've got the large keeper hut, since a small one can sometimes make a staff workload blockage. Then I've got a vet clinic, and I found I only need a small staff room. Then I always put in a research building because I find I'm constantly researching new animals, and the vets have to walk to the research centre to be able to complete that research, and if you put it too far away, it takes them a while to do it. That's the setup of my templated work zone setup now. Oh, another thing, I've left space at the back here just in case I ever need to add another building. Hey, and we've got a breakdown. Typical, something's screwing up when I'm showing you around. Oh, but no fear, we've got a mechanic on the case there. We'll leave them to get on with that. So yeah, can't say whether this is the most efficient layout for this or not. I'm okay taking the hit on additional cost considering the ease of using a template like this. I guess if we take a look at the heat map again, it gives you an idea of how many habitats are enclosed now within each of the work zones. So as an example, work zone 1 here, we don't have that template design yet for the work buildings there, and just 3 habitats in this one. That's really a reflection of efficiency being really crucial early game. By work zone 2, I've got a much bigger area covered here. That's when profit had started rolling in quite nicely, so it wasn't as important to have it close together. Work zone 3, this is still a work in progress because it's at the end of where we've reached with the zoo. And you can see here, this is when I started using that template design for the buildings. From here I've got into a rhythm, so it's that template design for the buildings and usually around 3 or 4, maybe 5 habitats depending how stretched out they are. Sometimes there is a few more depending if the habitat doors are all clustered together. It makes it easier for staff to get in between them without taking too long. But in general, this is the process I'm going through when setting up work zones. I hope that's answered any burning questions people have on the work zones. Not really an expert strategy for me on this one, just muddling along as best as I can. Anyway, let's get on with adding some new animals. First in today is the Jaguar. Like a majority of the cats in game, only 2 of these in an enclosure and no interspecies bonus here. Jaguars are extremely solitary creatures, so yeah, very shy animals, definitely can't have any guest interaction with them. It does bug me a little bit in other games that I've played that are the adventure or survival type ones. They always have, if it's in the right environment, they'll put Jaguars in and they will actively seek you out to attack you. Well, in real world terms, that would rarely happen. Unless you were threatening their young or they were starving, then there's very little chance of a Jaguar seeking out humans to attack them, as far as I'm aware. However, I can say I haven't recently played one specific game that had Jaguars in, Green Hell, if you've heard of it. That's a very pretty game set within a huge Amazon-style environment, and that gave me some good inspiration of the type of environment a Jaguar would live in. So my design for this is influenced by that game to a degree. Another big influence for me on this one, my local zoo is Chester Zoo, and they have a fantastic Jaguar habitat there. There's an inside part of that enclosure that lets you get up and close to them. Although, we'll say in the 10 plus visits that I've made to Chester Zoo, I've maybe once or twice seen them in the inside bit of the enclosure. They really do take the Jaguar's shyness there seriously. So the inside there is jam-packed with vegetation and little hidey holes for the Jaguars to seek refuge if they need to. Alas, this is Planet Zoo, and although it is very true to life in some ways, the guest having a poor view will obviously reflect negatively on your profits. So I've not been able to replicate it exactly with the sheer volume of vegetation in this enclosure. The outside section of the Jaguar enclosure at Chester Zoo, it's set away from guests, so you can look into it, but it's not right up close to where the guests can view. And I thought for my enclosure here, why not try something similar? If you've been following through the entirety of this series, you'll know for the shy animals, I've been really reluctant to create anything that creates distress for the animals. But the in-game suggestions and hints does say for shy animals, you can de-stress them by having the one-way glass, but they also say that you can use vegetation and things that shield them from guests. So I thought for my outside area here, I'd try that out. We'll see how it goes. If the animals are getting too stressed if they're in the outdoors bit, then I'll add more one-way glass. But I thought I'd give it a go and try it with just the mesh fencing and see how we go on. The general idea is that the indoor section of this habitat is going to be the public-facing one, and the outdoor section is a nice private space for the Jaguars to enjoy some of the outside. Now, the indoor section, I did add windows on the outside of this because a general building like this, it would have windows there. But to protect the Jaguar's privacy, I've put screens in behind the windows and made a feature out of it rather than that being a place the guests can view. It will be fun to see if guests follow the initiative and follow the path through to the indoor section, or are they going to stand by those windows that I've put in the building and be like, can't see anything from here? Knowing how Planet Zoo works, they probably will complain, but all honesty, the point we're up to in the zoo, we're drastically losing money every time I press play on the game because I've got so many facilities, so many habitats. It's impossible to make a profit after a certain point, so I may as well just run this and do some features in that, yeah, it's not great for the guests, but it makes the zoo more enjoyable for the animals and looks a bit more realistic. There's certainly other ways to deal with profit loss if it comes to it, and I will go down those routes if I need to. For example, I could set up a profitable secondary zoo and use that to buy animals, put them in the trade centre, open the game in this zoo and sell those animals. It's an arduous task, it will take time, but it's a way to get money rolling in if I need to. Right now, the money situation is still manageable. I've lost about 3 million in 3 or 4 episodes, so yeah, it's not great. But I started with such a buffer, I was so conscious about this happening, I knew it was eventually that I've got a huge 17 million in the bank still, which, fingers crossed, should take us to the end of this series. We'll see. Cross that bridge when we come to it. Anyway, let's take a look at the finished enclosure. So, Jaguar enclosure, it's an indoor and outdoor space. For the indoor space, it's a custom-built building. Since the Jaguars are very shy animals, this is the first time I've used some of these indoor screenings to mask the guests from the animals on the outside. A different concept than I've done before, and I'm hoping it works really well. The building itself, I've constructed this using my own custom roof, and I guess this has become a house style for me for creating buildings in this zoo specifically. Inside here, there's a walkway where guests can see the Jaguars from either side. This is all one-way glass to not disturb them. Inside, pretty heavy vegetation. The Jaguars definitely prefer this. And here we go, get a look at the Jaguar. I've got one black Jaguar and one regular Jaguar for a bit of variety there. Nice to see guests have figured out they can walk inside here and they're not just stood outside at that blank window figuring out why they can't see the Jaguars. Oh, and there we go, spotted the other one. Looks like they're having a good go at the scratching post there. That was good timing, wasn't it? Such a big scratching post for such a little cat. Hey ho. Right, let's carry on having a look around. So, indoor section, yeah, we've got this nice view for guests here, and for the Jaguars. Oh, look at that. I forgot to fill that bit of wall in. I'll have to come back to that. Anyway, jaguars have a small water need, and I have seen that in real zoos, so I've added these little pools here or there just to fill that need in. I didn't feel like putting a full river or lake or anything in here for them. I've also got some standard climbing poles in for their climbing needs. Nothing fancy with these, just the regular ones that I use for most of the cats in this zoo. This takes us to the other side of the indoor bit of the habitat, and I do like that we've got this path going down in the middle, so you can see them on either side depending where the jaguars decide they want to be. Don't forget to say the roof lights down the middle, that adds some nice light for them. Moving to the outside, I do hope the wall is high enough out here. I haven't had any escapes yet, so fingers crossed this is high enough to contain them. Trying a new concept down at the front, so this is a vastly vegetated area, and I'm hoping that helps the jaguars not get stressed with the guests looking in. Not tried this before, so we'll see how that goes. If it doesn't work practically, at least aesthetically, I think that looks really good, having all that up front. So I hope it does work and I can repeat that. Anyway, that is the jaguars in. It's time we moved on to our next animal. Next up is Japanese macaques, and there's 8 of these needed in an enclosure, very similar to the needs of the capuchin monkey that we put in way back when. Something else with the macaques, they get an interspecies bonus with the red-crowned cranes. So of course we'll be adding those and making a joint habitat for them. For the cranes, just 4 cranes needed in the habitat, and space-wise, they both need quite similar. The macaques and for the cranes need a similar size, so I reckon about 1,000 square meters should do it. In terms of where I'm putting this, I've actually saved a space up by the Asian animals that we were working on last week. I think this is a perfect size. So in terms of what I've done to create this habitat, now I will admit I've really not done very much with the macaques at all. I did the starter habitat, which was probably a terrible design at the time. With that series, I rushed through all of those habitats in about 2 months, and by the time I got to the Jays, I was getting very tired of making habitats, I will admit. So yeah, probably a quite uninspired design for that one. The other time I did a habitat for the macaques, I made an indoor zoo that was a Christmas zoo, so it had all the cold biome animals in it that needed snow in their enclosure. Which brings me to the point, I know the macaques need snow this time. It's not going to be a surprise when I put them in and I'm like, uh-oh, they need snow. With this zoo, I'm quite adamant that any animal that needs snow in their habitat, then that snow should be contained within doors. This is set in a temperate biome after all. I feel like if you've got snow on the ground and it's outdoors, it wouldn't last very long and it would be very expensive in real terms to keep that and maintain it. So for the most part, all snow is contained within indoor sections. That's a grand idea until we get to the polar bear, which it's not that far away. So really not sure what I'm going to do about that, and I'm very nervous about it. That's still a problem that future me will have to deal with. But back to the macaques and red cranes. So it's a partial indoor habitat and partial outdoor habitat. Now for the indoor building for this, I'm using a blueprint that I put together for the red cranes in my starter habitat series. 2 reasons for this. Firstly being that I was really happy with how that enclosure came out. It looked quite unique and different than the traditional buildings I make. Secondly, if you watched last week's episode, I'm still in a bit of a busy period at the moment, in general for real life. So having something ready-made has really helped with time for me to get stuff out this week. Thankfully, that busy period for me is coming to an end really soon, so it's back to normal scheduling, hopefully from next week. That means I can spend a little more time investigating how to create habitats that are more unique and create something more original than just reusing my old stuff all the time. It just so happens that for this enclosure, all the time I thought I want to use some elements of my starter habitat one that I made because it works so well. Talking of, so my preparations for this zoo in its entirety, I do think ahead and I do scan through the animals that are coming up and think, well, what am I going to do for them when I get to them? As a player that started Planet Zoo when it very first released, and I've played obsessively ever since, I'm close to 4,000 hours in the game. I've got about 11 hours to go and I reached that 4,000 goal. Over that time, I've created literally hundreds of habitats for multiple animals, some more concept stuff, some more realistic stuff. So when I'm coming up to new animals for this zoo, I have a general idea of what works well, what doesn't work so well, as well as spending a little extra time researching what it should look like and any new concepts that I can bring in. Now that my workload is soon to be reducing back to normal levels, I'm looking forward to getting back to exploring ideas again, back to my old Plastic Swan self. Getting back to the cranes and the Japanese macaques, the outside portion of this habitat. Now, this is mostly for the cranes. The cranes obviously have a water need, and instead of putting in a natural lake, I've gone for the man-made pool on this one. Meeting their water need fits in nicely at the front with this man-made pool, so guests have a nice view of watching the cranes have a little swim about there. About the only thing with this habitat, it was a little small when I first put it together with that indoor bit and the outdoor pool for the cranes, so I have added a little space at the back where the entrance gate is, so they've got a little room back there to be put into the enclosure. Nothing too drastic like I've tried in some of my other habitats, just a little bit of space there that backs right up into the boundary of the zoo itself. In terms of meeting the terrain needs for this habitat, I'm not as happy with this as I have been with some of my other habitats that have had snow in them. Macaques, they live in mountainous areas, so I could have been a bit more generous with the landscaping here. It would have been nice to set up an indoor area that reflected the mountainside. I'm sure if I'd had more time, I could have figured this out. So maybe this is an enclosure that I go back to at some point and recreate that. It's all flat at the moment and definitely not very inspiring. To meet their climbing needs and stuff like that, I've just borrowed the stuff that I used with the capuchin monkeys because I know it works. But yeah, it would have been nice to have something set up that created climbing frames to ledges and little outcrops in rocks. I feel like the cranes got all the attention with this build because they have special water needs, and I think I've fulfilled that quite nicely. The macaques, aside from filling the basics in, yeah, I have ignored them a little bit, which is unfair on them considering I've put so much effort into most of the other animals for this sim. Still got to go back and do the giraffe enclosure at some point because, yeah, that's the same. That's a bit neglected there, that one. Anyway, that's the gist of the combined macaque and red crane habitat, so let's take a look. So here it is, a combined habitat for the Japanese macaques and the red crown cranes. Being there's so many of them in this enclosure, I thought it'd need more space, but thankfully this works just fine. With the macaques having a snow requirement, it's a half indoor, half outdoor habitat. That's so that the snow is contained within the indoor section. Nice big windows here for guests to see into there. And there we go. Let's see a look at the macaques in action. I've noticed in the game they're very active animals. They're running all over the place, up and down the climbing frames all the time. So very active. At the back here, I've added one of the in-game blueprints for the bedding area. Put them on a bit of a raised platform there. Here we've got the crane. They're still getting their bearings with the enclosure. Not long put them in here, so haven't seen them swimming yet. If they're anything like the flamingos though, it won't be long before they're in this outdoor pool all the time. Speaking of, this is the outdoor man-made pool I've put in here, right against the barrier, so guests have a good view here of that. Oh, and looks like the macaque's gone in the pool before the crane has, which is strange. Hey ho. Anyway, I've fitted in the fountain here for the cranes when they actually get out here. They'll enjoy that waterfall. Similar, they have a wading pool here up at the back. And something wrong with the macaque here? Are you okay, buddy? You're sitting rather strangely there and you don't look very happy about it. Just eyeing up the climbing frame there. One of 3 climbing frames in this habitat to meet their needs. Nothing special about them. I just stole them from the capuchin monkey enclosure, I'll be honest. Anyway, that is the combined habitat there for both of these animals. Nothing out of the ordinary or special about this one, but I guess not all of them do need to be special in some kind of way, do they? Seems very popular with the guests already, so that's a bonus. I'll take that as a win. That's everything I've had time to add this week, so that is it, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.